Agriculture Tip Tuesday. Today we will be talking about organic farming. So just a little bit about myself. I'm one of you guys' interns for the 4-H Agronomy and Horticulture program this summer. I will be a senior in college this fall, and I am studying animal science and sustainable agriculture. We also have Mr. McNeil on with us today. He is a regional educator, and Grace Lee, she is another intern. And we have Jacob Bolson with us, who is an organic farmer from Iowa. So with that, we'll get started. Over to him and let him introduce himself and tell us about organic farming.
All right, Ryan, thank you. Good morning, or I shouldn't say good morning, it's after lunch now. Good afternoon, everybody. As Ryan said, my name is Jacob Bolson, coming to you from Hubbard, Iowa this morning, which to give a little perspective, I'll show a map here in a bit, but Hubbard, Iowa is roughly about 15 minutes from the intersection of Interstate 35 and US Highway 20 right in central Iowa. And I'm going to share a few comments this afternoon about my wife's family farm, Knutson Family Farms here in central Iowa, where I have the pleasure of marrying into the family that, as Ryan said, the family does farm organically. I also work full-time in the machinery business and then work with the family on the organic farm. So let's go to the next slide, please. Plan for today, I'll give a little bit of an introduction to the family and the farm. I want to share a couple comments about organic agriculture, and then I'm going to talk briefly about some of the equipment that we utilize, as well as some of the technology that we utilize to help make organic production as efficient as possible. Next slide, please, Ryan. So here's a picture of the family. As we like to say, this was a few grandchildren ago, as there's been some additional kids since this picture was taken. But this is the Knutson family, of which my wife and a couple of my kids are down in the lower right, blessed to truly be a multi-lineage family farm here in central Iowa. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the farm. So it's actually 3 different entities or 3 different businesses. My father-in-law and mother-in-law at the top, Roger and Mary, and then their elder son, or my elder brother-in-law, Zach, and his wife, Carrie, also farm and have beef cattle. Their younger son, Isaac, farms and has beef cattle. And then my wife and I work, as I mentioned, full-time in the machinery business. My wife is a full-time nurse, but we also contribute to the farm as much as we can, as I'll be talking about here today. Throughout the family, I emphasize strong family collaboration. We are a true family farm. You hear a lot about that perhaps in the press around, you know, what is a family farm? Well, we are truly a multi-lineage family farm and do a lot of equipment, labor, and facility collaboration here across the different businesses. So let's go to the next slide, please, Ryan. So a little bit about back where we are. So the family got started with organic agriculture back in 1999. So over 20 years now of raising organic crops here in central Iowa. The family farms both in Hardin County, which is in the central part of the state, so the lower star on the lower part of the Ryan Stream, as well as in Wright County, up not too far from the Mason City area. Those of you that know your southern Minnesota geography, Mason City's not too far from the Minnesota border. The crops that the family raises include corn, soybeans, oats, as well as hay and forages in an organic sense. One of the requirements about being an organic operation is that you have to have a very strict rotation, which includes having small grains in the rotation. And so once every 3 years or once every 5 years, generally we have a small grain in the rotation, which for the family here, we raise oats. So let's go to the next slide, please, Ryan. So Ryan already talked a little bit about what does it mean to raise crops organically. The second bullet point, as I called it, it's complicated, and I just went on the USDA's website from the folks out in Washington, D.C., and you get that nice long paragraph about what it is. So what does it practically mean, which is exactly what Ryan hit on. Organic agriculture means raising crops organically. Not only does it require a strict inspection and a strict certification process, but it does not utilize, or it does not allow the use of synthetic fertilizers or synthetic pesticides. For the sake of time, I won't get into it today, but this does not necessarily mean that organic farms still do not use herbicides or fungicides or insecticides, pesticides, shall we say, but they all have to be naturally derived instead of synthetically produced. For example, there are products out there that are derived from bacteria that are in the soil, which it sounds like you all have had the opportunity to learn a little bit about soil earlier through some of these webinars. There are fungicides and pesticides that have been extracted from insects, all derived from nature. So that for us, it's no synthetic fertilizer or synthetic pesticides. Let's go to the next slide, please, Ryan. So this is a video showing planting the corn crop. Ironically, the field that is right outside the building that I'm sitting in. This is a video of planting corn back at the beginning of May. We use 12-row machinery with a 30-inch row spacing. So 30 inches in between each row, of which there are 12 rows. So when we are working in the fields, we are working at 30 feet at a time. You can see here for planting, we use a John Deere tractor as well as a John Deere planter. And this, again, was planting corn back at the beginning of May in the field behind me. Very similar, if not identical, to how your more traditional conventional operation also plants corn, soybeans. If anybody from the Red River Valley is on the webinar today, sugar beets, for example. Nothing really unique about this planter from the perspective of the fact that we're utilizing it to plant an organic crop. Again, in the case of this video, organic corn. Let's go to the next slide, please, Ryan. Where things do get a little bit unique is weed control, and the fact that we cannot use synthetic herbicides, and in general, organic herbicides are cost prohibitive. They're just too expensive. We rely very, very heavy on mechanical weed control, of which an example is that is shown here in the picture. Let's go to the next slide, please, Ryan, and start the video. So this is a video that I took when I was actually out cultivating some organic soybeans last week. Utilizing, this is a John Deere 4440 tractor, as well as a John Deere 725 mid-mount cultivator. Now, when we get to the question and answer session at the end, I want somebody to be able to tell me, what are the advantages if you see that cultivator, how it's on the front of the tractor, and you can see when I'm taking the video here, that's me sitting in the tractor, attempting to steer the tractor and cultivate to do mechanical weed control. I didn't run over too many soybeans, thankfully. But when we get to the chat at the end, I'd like somebody to chime in and offer their thoughts on why in the world would we be interested in having a cultivator on the front of the tractor versus perhaps on the rear of the tractor, which is where your traditional implements are when you're utilizing a tractor. And towards the end here, we'll actually do a little bit of a walk around showing a different showing a different cultivator that is sitting right behind me. So that's your homework. Make sure you write it down so you don't forget, because I'd like to have a little discussion on that at the end about what is the advantage of having a cultivator on the front of the tractor. Next slide, please, Ryan. So let's talk a little bit about some automation that we utilize, or robotics that we utilize, shall we say. Many of you might be familiar with the various robotics opportunities that you all have now, such as the FIRST robotics competition or the Lego robotics competition that utilizes automation technology. Much of that in school didn't exist when I was in school, but now I see the opportunities that are coming up today for you all, as well as my kids, and it's really quite exciting. And many of those same technologies we actually use here on the farm in organic agriculture, and it starts with what can we do when we're doing weed control, mechanical weed control, cultivating, like you saw in that picture. What can we do to help automate that process? Because if you think about driving across the field, driving a tractor and steering your cultivator, there's a lot of things that you're trying to do at the same time, multitasking. And regardless of what we all might think, we're all very poor multitaskers. The human brain is. I'm a poor multitasker. Ryan's a poor multitasker. Brian is a poor multitasker. Grace is a poor multitasker. It's just the way the human brain is designed. And so we use automation technology very similar, again, to what you all might be exposed in school through some of the various competitions that are out there, or what you might be utilizing in your classroom for your teachers to educate you with. We use many of those similar things. But what's ironic about it is there have actually been solutions in the market to help with automating mechanical weed control for over 30 years. And those solutions, what they do is, if we can take some steps of the mechanical weed control process and automate them so that the human brain can focus more on some of the important steps, it allows us to do a better job of doing mechanical weed control. So let's talk about one of those. If you can go to the next slide, please, Ryan. So when we are using a cultivator on the back of the tractor, there's a product that's been around since the 1970s or 1980s called the Navigator. And I'll show you one here in a minute. It's a sliding hitch that goes on the back of the tractor, and it uses tactile sensors, also known as wands, to feel where those rows are, to help position that cultivator in the exact right spot as you're going through the field. A more recent technology comes from a company that's actually in Minnesota. Their US office is not too far from Fargo, right across the river from Fargo, in a little town called, the name of the company is called Reichart. And they have a product called the Sonic Sensor, which what it does is it uses sound waves to sense where the position of those plants are, as you can see in the lower right picture, and then automatically steer the cultivator or steer the tractor based upon the readings of those ultrasonic sensors. That's a bit more recent technology. And then we have, again, the older technology of the wands, like you see on the Navigator there on the left two pictures. So let's go ahead to the next slide, please, and let's talk a little bit about GPS. So many of you probably have a smartphone, right, of which your phone or maybe your parents' phone, maybe your car has some sort of navigation in it. It's all using GPS. And we use a very high accuracy GPS here on the farm to help steer our vehicles, our tractors, as we're going across the field. Now there's various brands of GPS products on that are available to farmers, whether it's John Deere, like the hat I'm wearing, Ag Leader, you see Reichart again, lots of different brands. But similar, it is if the tractor can steer itself, it helps us do a better job of cultivating, because when we're going a field, and if we think back to the previous slide where we have that Navigator steering the cultivator, now as we think about what we've taken out of our brain in terms of multitasking, I no longer have to steer the tractor, and I've got the Navigator helping to steer the cultivator. Now I can be laser focused on how good of a job are we doing at cultivating that field. Just like if you're out in your garden at your house and you've got a shovel or some sort of a hoe, and you want to do a good job of removing weeds from, say, around those tomato plants, around those sweet corn plants, around those peppers. You want to do a good job. You want to get as many weeds away from those plants in your garden as you can, which is no different than if we were out cultivating in the organic cornfield next to me. We would want to be doing as good of a job as possible with pulling the weeds out of that field. So let's go ahead to the next slide, please. And this is a brief video. This was taken last summer, cultivating some organic soybeans. And what this video shows, once the PowerPoint catches up here, is this shows cultivating organic soybeans where we've got auto steer on the tractor. So the tractor is steering itself. And we have a Navigator on the cultivator. So the cultivator is steering itself. And in this case, this is my father-in-law operating the tractor. So he is able to be 100% focused on watching that cultivator and making sure it's doing the best job possible at cultivating those soybeans and removing weeds that can negatively impact yield, which from some of the other agronomy webinars that you all have taken, I presume you've learned a little bit about how weeds negatively impact yield. And since we cannot use synthetic herbicides, this is our main method of weed control, is the cultivation. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So what does the future hold? Well, that's a great question. No doubt, as this slide says here, or this is a picture of a magazine from nearly 10 years ago, where the title of the main feature of the magazine was called The Farm of the Future. No doubt the industry is on a path of more and more automation. We're going beyond just using GPS to steer the tractors, but we are quickly going into the world of robotics and true autonomy, which is really exciting. As you all think about what you might be learning about in school or doing through things like the first robotics competition, all that is very practical to being applied to the farm to help with weed control. There's already autonomous robots working in vegetable fields in California, such as in lettuce. And so it is really exciting of where the transformation, shall we say, from automation, things that, for example, GPS to steer the tractor going across the field, to true autonomy, and how that's going to impact agriculture in the future. Just like, I don't know if you all have a chance to learn perhaps about dairy farms at all in this series through the extension and through the 4-H, but robotics is already very, very common in the dairy industry, with robots being used to not only milk cows, but also to feed cows and do other chores on the dairy farm. So we've got a lot of exciting years in front of us with new technology helping to make organic agriculture more and more efficient. So let's go to the next slide, please. So with that said, before I flip over to the camera, and we're going to go do a little walk around of this tractor behind me and the cultivator, I certainly want to thank you all for joining in today for this very, very brief review of organic agriculture in central Iowa from the perspective of corn, soybeans, oats, and forages. Also want to thank Brian and Ryan for the opportunity to join you all today. So with that said, let's go ahead and flip over to the camera, Ryan. And you all should, as I switch the camera, you all should a tractor. All right. So what we're going to do here is, this is a 1970s John Deere tractor, and this is a small 6-row cultivator. That one of the things that sometimes you have to get a little creative working in organic agriculture is you bring together lots of different solutions from different manufacturers. And so this is a cultivator that the family built using parts from 3 different companies. We use the actual row unit itself, which, if you can see my hand, this is the row unit here. This is a row unit from Case IH, but the actual sweeps themselves, or shovels themselves, if you can see my hand here, these are John Deere parts. And then finally, the bar itself is a 3rd company, is a Bush Hog toolbar. And then if we go back, you might remember me talking about the Navigator, or the wand system, to sense the position of the cultivator as we're going through the field. That is what this large gray structure is on the back of the tractor. If I come down here real close, and it's on the ground, the cultivator's on the ground right now, so it's a little deceiving, but if I get my hand in the right spot, you can see a steel rod right there. And there's another steel rod that goes right over there. And it's basically the shape of a V, that V senses the position of the crop as you're going through the field. And then this hitch right here slides back and forth to the left and to the right to make sure that all of our shovels are in the right spot, doing the best job possible to cultivate that crop as we go through the field. So a little bit of a homemade cultivator, shall we say, but sometimes that's what we like to do, is find different parts from different solutions or different companies and put together a package. This will be out in the field depending on the rain. It looks like the rain's not too far from many of you, and it's coming our way. So this will probably be in the field later this week, cultivating some organic corn. So I wanted to share that briefly with you all, as I know we're constrained on time this afternoon, so we could probably talk about machinery all afternoon, but wanted to share that as an example of a cultivator that we use, and how even with a tractor that's older than probably everybody on the line today, it's certainly older than me, as well as a cultivator that's homemade, we're able to take technology and add that technology to it to help make that task of weed control in the organic field as efficient as possible. So let's go back to the slides, please, Ryan. So with that said, we'll close things up and move over to questions. I have seen some questions popping in. If you go to the next slide, my contact information is on here. If anybody wants to visit more about organic agriculture, feel free to reach out to me, both my email address and my mobile phone. Always like to have a good conversation. And with that said, let's pause. Thank you again, and let's go over.